She walked out of the facility on a Tuesday morning at 7:14. Not because 7:14 meant anything. It was simply the time the gates opened and the time her name was called and the time she picked up the bag that had been in storage for 18 months. The same bag she had come in with, the same clothes inside it, the same phone that no longer held a charge, and walked through the corridor and through the second gate and through the final door and into the specific quality of Lagos morning air that is different from all other morning air because it is Lagos and because she had not been inside it for a very long time. She stood on the pavement outside. She had thought about this moment often in the preceding months, had constructed versions of it in her mind during the specific, unglamorous hours of the night when sleep was not available and the mind goes where it will. She had imagined feeling something large. Relief or anger or the specific, flooding quality of freedom that people describe when they have been confined. What she felt instead was the specific, practical orientation of a person arriving somewhere new and assessing what is available. The pavement. The street. The morning. Victor's car, parked across the road, with Victor standing beside it in the way he always stood. Slightly awkward, as if he was not certain he had the right to be present but had decided to be present anyway. She crossed the road. He said, "Ada." She said, "Victor." He said, "You look." He stopped. She said, "I know." He said, "The car's warm. Do you want to sit for a minute before we go?" She said, "Let's go." She got in. He got in. He drove. She looked at the city coming back to her through the window, the specific, unstoppable quality of a Lagos morning proceeding regardless of what had happened to any individual person inside it. The city did not know she had been away. The city had not adjusted. It simply continued, which was the most honest thing it could have done. After 20 minutes, Victor said, "There is something I need to show you." She said, "Show me." He handed her an envelope without taking his eyes off the road. She opened it. Inside, a key on a plain ring and a folded letter. She unfolded the letter. It was on Crestline Holdings' letterhead, which she did not immediately recognize. The letter was brief. It said that Crestline Holdings was offering her the position of head of fashion at their creative division. It said the position had been held for her. It said a furnished flat in Lekki had been arranged and that the key enclosed was for that flat. It said the offer required no immediate response. It said the position would remain open for 30 days. It was signed by the chairman of Crestline Holdings. The name below the signature was one she did not recognize. She read the letter twice. She said, "Who is Crestline Holdings?" Victor said, "One of the largest holding companies in Lagos. They own interests in retail, real estate, logistics, fashion. The chairman keeps a low profile. Not many people know his face." She said, "How did they know I was being released today?" Victor said, "I don't know." She said, "Did you arrange this?" He said, "I wish I had." "No." She looked at the letter again. She looked at the key. She said, "Take me to the flat." He said, "Are you sure you don't want to?" He stopped himself. He knew better than to suggest she go somewhere and rest. He had known her long enough to understand that rest was not what she needed. What she needed was ground, somewhere to stand. He took her to the flat. The flat was on the 3rd floor of a building on a quiet street in Lekki. Not ostentatious, not the kind of place that announced money, but the kind of place that communicated careful thought. Someone had considered what she would need and provided it without excess. A kitchen with the things a kitchen requires. A desk by the window. Bookshelves, empty, waiting. A wardrobe. The bed made with the specific, neutral precision of a space that had been prepared for someone and was now ready to receive them. She stood in the middle of the main room for a long time. Victor stood in the doorway. She said, "You can go." "I am all right." He said, "I know you are. I just want to stand here for a moment if that's okay." She said, "It is okay." He stood there. She stood there. Outside, the Lagos morning continued. After a while she said, "I am going to accept the position." He said, "I thought you would." She said, "I do not know who arranged this. I do not know what they want from it. But I am a Cole and I was not built to sit still." He said, "No, you were not." She said, "I am going to need 30 days to be ready." He said, "You have 30 days. She said, "And I am going to need you to keep doing what you have been doing." He said, "What have I been doing?" She said, watching, paying attention, writing things down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, that I can do. He left. She unpacked the bag from the facility, the specific, limited contents of 18 months of managed existence, and she put everything in its correct place, and she stood at the window of the flat and she looked at the street below and she thought, this is where it begins again. Not where it left off. That version of the beginning was gone. This was a different beginning, harder and more accurate and built on what the last 18 months had produced in her, which was the specific, tempered quality of someone who has been through something terrible and has not been broken by it but has been changed by it into something that is not weaker but is not the same. She thought about Emeka. She had thought about Emeka often during the 18 months. Not with the recursive, exhausting quality of the first months. The specific, circular thinking of a person who cannot stop returning to the question of how they did not see it coming. That had burned itself out by the 6th month. What remained after was something cleaner and more useful. Not hatred. Not even anger in the simple sense. Something more like accuracy. A precise, patient understanding of what had been done and who had done it and what the correct response to it was. She was not in a hurry. The correct response required her to be ready. She had 30 days to become ready. She began. The 30 days were the most disciplined 30 days of her life. She was always disciplined, had always been the kind of person who understands that talent without structure is a resource that dissipates, that the difference between someone who makes things and someone who makes things that last is almost entirely a matter of the systems they build around the talent. But these 30 days were different. These were the 30 days of a person who has had 18 months to think about what they would do when they got out and is now doing it. She sketched every morning for 4 hours. The sketches were not for a collection. They were for her own inventory, the specific reassertion of a designer who needed to establish privately that what she had before was still there. It was still there. It had not atrophied. If anything, it had sharpened. She thought about proportion and line differently now, with the specific quality of someone who had had nothing to look at for a long time and had therefore looked more carefully at the things that were available. She researched Crestline Holdings for a week. What she found was the outline of something substantial. A holding company that had been built quietly and consistently over 10 years, real estate, logistics, a retail portfolio, and now a fashion division that was 2 years old and had not yet found its footing. The chairman was almost entirely absent from the public record. A name, a signature on documents, no photographs she could find, no interviews, no industry events. The company ran through its directors, through Grace Owusu, who was listed as the chairman's personal assistant and the primary contact for the fashion division, through a structure that was efficient precisely because it did not require the chairman to be visible. She called Grace Owusu on the 15th day. The call lasted 42 minutes. She asked specific questions. Grace answered them without evasion: the budgets, the existing team, the current contracts, the positioning challenges, the 2 collections the division had produced that had been competent but not remarkable. She asked about the chairman. Grace said, he prefers not to be the face of the company. She asked if she would meet him. Grace said, yes, when you are ready. She said, I will be ready in 15 days. Grace said, we will be expecting you. She put the phone down. She went back to the desk. She sketched. On the 28th day, Victor came to the flat with food and information, which were the 2 things he had always brought when he came to see her, even before, even when she was at the height of things at Emeka's company, and the food was unnecessary because there was always food and the information was professional gossip rather than anything useful. He said, the industry knows you are out. She said, I assumed. He said, Emeka knows. She said, and? Victor sat down at the kitchen table and put the food containers between them. He had brought soup from the place on the road that had been there since before either of them could remember, the specific, permanent quality of a Lagos food spot that has outlasted every development around it because the food is correct and there is no other reason needed. He said he does not know about Crestline yet. Or if he knows, he has not indicated it publicly. She said, what is he doing? Victor said, the company is doing well enough. Without your collection work, it plateaued after the listing. They have been producing competent things, serviceable, nothing that generates the kind of attention the early collections did. But he is not struggling. He has Linda's family's retail connections, and that has kept the revenue steady. She said, and Linda? Victor said, still with him. Or still in the same orbit. It is sometimes hard to tell whether they are together or whether they are simply bound together by the shared knowledge of what they did. She received this. She said, "Do you still have the documentation from before? The things you were building?" He said, "Everything. 18 months of additional work. I have sources inside the original investigation who are willing to talk now who were not willing to talk then." He paused. "Ada, what you have is close to what you need to reopen the case." She said, "Not yet." He said, "When?" She said, "When it will do the most damage. Not now, when I am just out and it looks like a grievance. Later, when I have built something again and the contrast is undeniable." He said, "That is a long game." She said, "Yes." She ladled soup into a bowl. She ate. The soup was correct, the way it had always been correct, the way that some things do not change regardless of what changes around them, and this is a form of faithfulness worth acknowledging. She said, "2 more days." He said, "Are you ready?" She looked at the window. She looked at the desk. She looked at the sketches on the wall, 30 days of morning work, the specific accumulation of someone who had been reinventing a practice and was now certain it was reinvented. She said, "I have been ready for 18 months. I just needed somewhere to stand." She walked into Crestline Holdings on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock. She had chosen 8 o'clock deliberately, early enough to communicate that she was not performing confidence but had it, not so early that it looked like anxiety. She wore the specific, considered clothes of a person who understands that appearance is communication and has decided what she wants to communicate. Competence, precision, and the particular quality of someone who is not asking for anything. Grace Owusu met her at reception. 30 years old, specific and warm in the way of someone who is genuinely good at their work and knows it without needing to perform it. She walked at ease through the building, the offices, the design floor, the sample rooms, the boardroom, with the unhurried quality of someone who had prepared this walk and was executing it correctly. The team was assembled in the design floor meeting room. There were 11 of them. She looked at each face as she came in, and she did the specific, rapid work of reading a room that she had been doing since she was 20 and sitting in meetings with people who were twice her age and had not yet understood what she was. She could see immediately who was there because they wanted to be and who was there because they had to be. The split was roughly even. The person who was most visibly not there by choice was a woman near the window, well-dressed, capable-looking, the specific tight quality of someone who had expected a different outcome and was managing their response to not getting it. Adiz opened the meeting without preamble. She said, "My name is Adiz Cole. I am the new head of fashion for this division. Before I tell you what we are going to do, I would like to understand what we have done." She looked at the woman near the window. She said, "Could you walk me through the last 2 collections? Not the press materials. The actual decisions. Why those fabrics? Why those silhouettes? Why those price points?" The woman, Shade, she would learn, said, with respect, "Is this really the most productive use of our first meeting?" Adiz said, "Yes." Shade said, "The collections were developed with full team input and were well received within the division's positioning." Adiz said, "I did not ask how they were received. I asked why those specific decisions were made. The fabric weight on the lead pieces is heavier than the market position warrants. The silhouettes are technically competent, but they do not have a point of view. Can you tell me what point of view the division is trying to establish?" Shade was quiet. Adiz said, "I am not asking to diminish anyone's work. I am asking because a fashion division without a point of view is a production facility, and we are not a production facility. We are a creative company, and creative companies require a position. I need to understand what position we have been trying to occupy, so I know whether to continue it or replace it." The room was very still. A younger member of the team, a man of about 25 named Tund, said, "We have been trying to occupy the premium contemporary market. Modern Lagos woman, professional, mid to high income. But if I am honest, the last 2 collections felt like they were describing that woman rather than speaking to her." Adiz looked at him. She said, "Yes, that is exactly right. Describing rather than speaking. That is what we are going to change." The room shifted. Shade, by the window, made a specific, barely perceptible adjustment. Not concession, not quite, but the recognition of someone who has encountered a level of precision they had not anticipated and is recalibrating in response. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, Adiz had a complete picture of the division's assets and gaps, a working relationship with 7 members of the team, and a clear understanding that Shade was not an enemy. She was a capable professional whose ego had been touched by not getting the position and who would, if given the right conditions, become useful. People like Shade were manageable. What was not manageable was mediocrity that did not know it was mediocre. Shade knew exactly what she was. That was workable. At 4 in the afternoon, Grace appeared in the doorway of Adiz's new office. She said, "The chairman would like to see you." Adiz stood. She followed Grace down the corridor and up one floor and through a door at the end of a hall that opened into a corner office with windows on 2 sides and the specific, considered quality of a space that had been arranged by someone who thought about the relationship between work and environment. He was standing at the window when she came in. He turned. 3 houses down. Sewell Street. The jacaranda tree at the corner. The sound of his mother calling his name from the doorway in the evenings. 20 years. He had changed, the specific, gravity-altered quality of someone who has been doing serious things in the world and carries it differently. Broader across the shoulders. The face older, but in the way that faces get older when they have been tested by something real and have come through it. The eyes exactly the same. She said, "Kofi." He said, "Ada." They looked at each other across the office. She said, "This is your company." He said, "Yes." She said, "Since when?" He said, 10 years. She thought about 10 years. She thought about the listing night and the courtroom and the facility and the Tuesday morning and the flat in Lecky and the letter on Crestline Holdings letterhead and the name at the bottom she had not recognized. She said, "You could have told me." He said, "You would not have taken the position." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited to. He sat behind the desk. She said, "Why did you offer it to me?" He said, "Because you are the best designer I have ever encountered and the division needs the best designer I have ever encountered." She said, "That is a business reason." He said, "Yes." She said, "Is there another reason?" He looked at her. He said, "Ada, there has always been another reason. But today I am your employer and you are my head of fashion, and that is the conversation that is available to us right now." She received this. She said, "All right." She stood. She said, "The division needs a full repositioning. The current work is technically adequate and creatively insufficient. I need 6 months and full creative authority. If you give me those things, I will give you a division that this city talks about." He said, "You have them." She said, "Good." She walked to the door. She stopped. She said, "Kofi, the flat." He said nothing. She said, "Thank you." She went back to work. The first collection took 4 months. Not 6, she had asked for 6 and used 4, which was the specific characteristic efficiency of someone who builds in slack because the work always takes longer than planned and then works in a way that makes the slack unnecessary. The team understood this about her by the end of the 2nd month. Tund understood it first. Shade understood it last, and in the understanding became the most useful person on the floor. Her technical precision combined with Adiz's vision produced a quality of execution that the division had not previously achieved. They did not discuss this directly. They simply worked. The work was the conversation. The collection was called Sewell. Not because she had told anyone about the street. She had not. She had simply named it for what it represented to her, the specific foundational quality of a place you come from that remains in you regardless of what happens between the leaving and the returning. The pieces were modern and precise and entirely rooted, the kind of work that knows exactly where it is from and is not apologetic about it. The fabrics were Nigerian. The silhouettes were architectural. The details were the kind that rewarded looking closely. The price points were correct for the market without performing accessibility. The press preview was on a Thursday evening. Adiz stood at the back of the room and watched the journalists and buyers move through the collection. She had learned long ago that the most accurate read of a collection was not the formal response, the reviews, the coverage, but the specific quality of attention people gave individual pieces when they thought no one was watching them. She watched a buyer from one of the city's major department stores, a woman named Mrs. Afolabi who had been in the Lagos fashion market for 30 years, stand in front of the lead piece for 4 minutes. She watched a journalist photograph the same jacket 3 separate times from 3 separate angles. She watched Shade, who had been the last to believe and was therefore watching with the most calibrated eye in the room, stand at the entrance and look at the full floor and allow herself, very briefly, an expression of genuine satisfaction. Grace appeared at her shoulder. She said, "The chairman is here." Adiz said, "I know." He was at the far end of the room, not performing presence, simply standing with the specific quality of someone observing something they built. Not the collection, the person who made the collection, and what it said about the decision to bring her here. He was not looking at the clothes. He was looking at the room, looking at the clothes. Their eyes met across the preview. She gave him nothing and everything simultaneously. The specific expression of a professional who is satisfied with her own work and knows it and is allowing that satisfaction to be visible to exactly one person. He gave her the same thing back. Grace, who had been watching both of them for 4 months, decided privately that she was running out of patience with the pair of them. After the preview, Kofi found her at the edge of the emptying room. He said, "The place on the road is still open." She said, "I know." He said, "Come and eat." She said, "Yes." They went. It was late. Past 10, the specific late of a work event that has gone long in the way that good ones do, and the place was quiet with the quality of a Lagos night spot that has been doing what it does long enough to be comfortable in its own skin at any hour. The woman who ran it had been running it since before either of them could remember. She brought them food without being asked and looked at Adiz with the specific, unhurried recognition of someone who has seen many versions of many people and registers the passage of time the way that certain kinds of attention do, completely without comment. They ate. She said, "The collection is called Soul." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I know." She said, "You know what that means?" He said, "Yes." She said, "I did not name it for you. I named it for the street, for the specific quality of a place that stays in you." He said, "I know." She said, "But you are also part of the street." He said, "Yes." They ate in silence for a while, the comfortable silence of two people who have said something and are now sitting with it. She said, "Tell me how you built it. The company. The 10 years. I want to know the actual version." He told her. He had left at 18 with the specific, unglamorous combination of a secondary school certificate and the understanding that the gap between where he was and where he intended to be was a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be accepted. He went to Abuja, construction work, site supervision, the entry point available to someone who needs money immediately and cannot afford to be selective. He saved. He studied on his own real estate, property investment, the specific mechanics of how money moves through assets. He made his first investment at 22 in a small commercial property he had identified through his own analysis as undervalued. He was right. He sold it at 24 for 3 times what he paid. From that point, the growth was not fast, but it was consistent. Real estate into logistics. Logistics into retail. A holding structure built carefully, each business supporting the others. He came back to Lagos at 28 with enough to operate quietly and the clear understanding that invisibility was an advantage he intended to preserve. She listened. She said, "All of this while I was at Emeka's company." He said, "Yes." She said, "You knew what was happening there." He said, "I knew the shape of it. Not the specifics. I knew you were doing the work and the company was growing because of the work." He paused. "I tried to find a way in, to offer something, but there was nothing I had that was proportional to what you were building. It would have looked like." He stopped. He said, "I did not want to be the person from Soul Street who showed up with less than you deserved." She said, "And when it fell apart?" He said, "I was not in Lagos. I came back when I heard. By the time I got back, the trial had gone the way it went. I could not reach the legal outcome from the outside. The evidence had been managed. So I waited, and I made sure that when you came out there was something waiting." She said, "The flat?" He said, "Yes." She said, "And the position?" He said, "Yes." She looked at him across the table. She said, "Kofi?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Why didn't you find me on Soul Street when we were 20 and just say something?" He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Because at 20 I had nothing to stand on. I was not going to come to you with nothing and ask you to choose it." He looked at the table. He said, "It was the most expensive decision I ever made." She said, "For both of us?" He said, "Yes." She looked at the food. She looked at the room, the specific, permanent quality of a place that has outlasted every version of the people who use it. She said, I am not ready to know what I feel about any of this yet. I want you to understand that. He said, I understand. She said, but I am glad you told me. He said, so am I. They finished eating. He paid. She did not argue, which was not submission but the specific acknowledgement of an occasion that had a particular weight and should be received in the way it was offered. They walked out into the Lagos night. She drove home. She sat at the desk in the flat for a long time. She thought, 20 years. She thought, he built a company in the dark while I was building one in the light. She thought, I do not know what to do with that yet. She went to bed. The collection launched to the kind of response that changes a division's trajectory. Not overnight. Real things do not happen overnight. And Adiz had no patience for the version of success that arrives before it has been earned and therefore does not last. But in the 6 weeks following the launch, 3 things happened that together constituted a shift. The department store buyer placed the largest single order in the division's history. A profile of Adiz in the industry's most significant trade publication ran under the headline, The Return. And at an industry networking event, a woman whose opinion shaped the direction of fashion conversation in the city said, publicly, in a room full of the right people, Adiz Cole is back and she is better than before. Emeka heard all 3 of these things. Adiz knew he had heard them because Victor told her, and because she understood Emeka well enough to know that news of this kind would reach him, and that his response would not be nothing. His response to things that threatened him was never nothing. It was calculated, and it was usually disguised as something other than what it was. The disguise this time was a client. Emeka approached the department store that had placed the large order, approached the buyer directly, offered a competing arrangement that was financially more attractive in the short term. The buyer called Adiz, not to tell her she had lost the account, to tell her that Emeka had made the approach and that the buyer was uncomfortable with it and wanted her to know. This told her 2 things. First, the buyer was loyal, which was a result of the work and not of the financial terms, which meant she had built the right kind of relationship. Second, Emeka was rattled enough to move this quickly, which meant the collection had landed harder than even she had anticipated. She went to see the buyer herself. She did not bring a counteroffer. She brought something else, the next 3 collection concepts, sketched at a level of detail that communicated both direction and commitment, and a conversation about the buyer's own ambitions for their fashion floor, what they were trying to build, what kind of designer they wanted to be associated with over the next 5 years. The conversation lasted 2 hours. The buyer did not take Emeka's deal. The buyer extended the existing arrangement by 2 years. When she returned to the office and told Grace what had happened, Grace said, should I tell the chairman? Adiz said, I will tell him myself. She went upstairs. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had remembered about him from Sewell Street. Even at 15 he had the specific quality of someone who heard things completely before deciding what to do with them. He said, well done. She said, it will not be the last time he does something like this. He said, no. She said, I want you to know that I do not need you to manage it. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I know. She said, I need to handle what comes from Emeka myself. Whatever he does, I need to be the one who responds to it. He looked at her. He said, I understand. She said, do you? He said, Ada, I have never doubted what you are capable of. She said, then let me demonstrate it. He said, yes. She went back downstairs. She did not look back. Grace, at her desk, noted the length of the meeting, 11 minutes, and noted that both parties had come out of it looking like people who had said something true and were now carrying the truth of it. That evening Grace stayed late. She was always the last to leave on days when something significant had happened. Not because the work required it, but because she needed the specific quiet of an empty office to think about what she had seen and what, if anything, she was going to do about it. She had been doing this since the division opened, more than 2 years now, since the day Kofi had asked her to find the right person for the fashion division and had handed her a name written on a piece of paper and had not explained how he knew it and had not needed to because Grace had worked for Kofi Mensah long enough to understand that the things he did not explain were always the most important things. She had found Adiz Cole's work. She had read everything written about her. She had understood, by the end of the first week of research, that the head of fashion position had been built for one specific person and that the only question was whether that person would accept it. she had also understood something else. Something she had been carrying for 4 months. She knocked on Adiz's office door at 8:30. Adiz looked up. Grace said, "May I come in?" Adiz said yes. Grace sat down in the chair across from the desk. She sat with the specific, composed posture of someone who has decided to say something and has decided that the correct approach is to say it directly rather than in the circling way that difficult things sometimes get said. She said, "There are things you do not know. About how you came to be here. I have been deciding whether to tell you for 4 months and I have decided that you should know." Adiz put down her pencil. Grace told her about the candidates. 2 of the 3 strongest applicants for the head of fashion position had withdrawn before the shortlist was finalized. Their withdrawals had been arranged. She did not know the specific mechanism. Kofi did not always tell her the specific mechanism. But she knew the outcome and she knew the intent. She told her about the retailer. After Emeka had approached the department store buyer, Kofi had had a conversation with the buyer's chairman. Not with the buyer directly, with her chairman. The conversation had been about long-term association and ambition and what kind of company the retailer wanted to be in 5 years. It had not been a threat and it had not been a bribe. But it had made the staying easier. Adiz listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, there was a silence. Then Adiz said, "Does he know you are telling me this?" Grace said, "No." Adiz said, "Why are you telling me?" Grace was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because you deserve to know. Because you have been working in this building for 4 months believing you are doing this entirely alone, and you are not entirely alone, and the not knowing the difference is costing you something even if you cannot name what it is." She paused. "And because I have watched the chairman love you from a distance for longer than I have worked for him and I am—" She stopped. She said, "I am tired of watching 2 people who could see each other clearly keep finding reasons not to say so." Adiz looked at her. She said, "That is more than I asked." Grace said, "I know. I am sorry. But it is also true." Adiz was quiet for a long time. She said, "Thank you, Grace." She said it the way she said all true things, plainly without performance. Grace understood that the thank you contained the full weight of what had just been said and what it would now require Adiz to decide. She left. Adiz sat alone in the office. She was not angry, not yet. What she felt was the specific, recalibrating quality of a person whose map of their situation has just changed and who is doing the work of redrawing it accurately. She had believed she was winning alone. She had not been winning entirely alone. The work was hers. The wins were hers. But the field had been leveled before she arrived on it, and she had not known, and the not knowing had been its own kind of cost. She sat with this for a long time. Then she picked up her pencil. She went back to work. Emeka's second approach was less subtle than the first. He sourced a former junior member of Adiz's original team at his company, a young man named Bode who had been present for the founding years, who had worked in the studio during the period of the early collections that had made the company's reputation, and who, for a sum that Victor subsequently determined was significant, agreed to make a public statement. The statement said that the early collections had been collaborative works. That Adiz's contribution had been important but not sole. That the genius of those years had belonged to the team and not to any individual designer. The statement appeared on a Friday morning, 2 days before a major industry presentation that Adiz was headlining. The timing was precise. It was designed to arrive at the worst possible moment and to create enough noise to undermine the presentation before it happened. Adiz read the statement on her phone at 6 in the morning in the flat in Lekki. She sat with it for 5 minutes. Then she went to her desk and she opened the drawer and she took out a folder. She had kept everything. This was not paranoia, it was the specific, organized instinct of someone who understood from the beginning that the thing she was building with Emeka was built on her contribution, and that the day might come when that contribution needed to be proven. The folder contained dated sketches going back 7 years. Original concept documents with her name and the date. Email correspondence from that period showing the specific, traceable development of ideas from her initial sketches through to final production. Communications from fabric suppliers who had worked directly with her. Notes from client fittings in her handwriting on paper that had never been digitized and could not have been produced after the fact. She called Victor. She said, "I need you to prepare something for me. I will send you the documents." He said, The statement about the collections? She said, yes. He said, how do you want to play it? She said, publicly, completely, before the presentation on Sunday. He said, that is 2 days. She said, yes. He said, I can do it. She sent him the documents. He published his piece on Saturday evening, a forensic-specific account of the development of each of the early collections, with reproductions of the original dated documents, the original sketches, the email chains. Not an opinion piece. A record. The kind of journalism that does not require the reader to take a position because the evidence does not leave room for a position. Bode's statement collapsed so completely that by Sunday morning it had been deleted from the platforms where it had been posted, and Bode himself had released a second statement, shorter, more painful, acknowledging that he had been paid to misrepresent the facts. Adiz arrived at the industry presentation on Sunday afternoon and delivered a presentation that the room discussed for 3 weeks afterward. Emeka was in the audience. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The conversation with Kofi about what Grace had told her happened on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after the presentation. She had been waiting for the right moment. Not avoiding it, simply understanding that the conversation required the correct conditions. She needed to not be angry when she had it. She needed to have processed what Grace had told her fully enough that the conversation could be honest rather than reactive. She had spent 3 weeks processing. She went to his office at 7 in the evening when the building was largely empty. He was at his desk. He looked up when she came in. He read her face with the specific accuracy of someone who has been watching one person's face for a very long time and knows all its registers. He said, Grace told you. She said, yes. He said, I know she did. She told me she was going to. Adiz sat down. She said, the candidates. He said, 2 of the 3 strongest applicants withdrew before the shortlist was finalized. She said, you arranged that. He said, yes. She said, the retailer. After Emeka approached them, he said, I had a conversation with their chairman. She said, about what? He said, about what kind of company they wanted to be associated with long-term. About their ambitions. About what Adiz Cole's name would mean to their floor in 5 years compared to what it would mean to Emeka Ose's company in 5 years. It was an honest conversation. I did not misrepresent anything. She said, you removed the obstacles. He said, yes. She said, Kofi. She said it the way she said all difficult things, directly, with the specific plainness of a person who has decided that the accurate version is the only version worth saying. She said, I needed to know I could do this on my own. He said, you can. What I did not change what you are capable of. It changed what was working against you. Those are not the same thing. She sat with this. She said, I have been thinking about whether I believe that. He said, and? She said, I believe it. She paused. But I am also angry. He said, I know. She said, not at the help. At the not knowing. He said, yes. She said, why did you not tell me? He looked at the desk for a moment. He said, because if you had known, you would have refused the help. And if you had refused the help, the field would not have been level. And you deserved a level field. She looked at him. He said, what Emeka and Linda did, putting you in that facility, they did not just take 18 months from you. They took your standing. Your professional standing, your public standing, your right to compete on the same ground as the people who stayed outside while you were inside. I could not give back the 18 months, but I could give back the ground. She was very quiet. She said, you could have told me afterward. Once the ground was level. He said, yes, I should have. She said, why didn't you? He looked at her. He said, because I was afraid that if you knew what I had done, you would feel you owed me something. And I do not want you to owe me anything. What I have done for you, I have done because it was the right thing to do and because he stopped. He said, because of what has always been true. And what has always been true does not come with a debt attached. She looked at him across the office in the empty building in the Lagos evening. She thought about 3 houses down. She thought about the jacaranda tree at the corner of Sewell Street. She thought about 18 months and the Tuesday morning and the letter and the flat and 4 months of work and a collection called Sewell and a room full of buyers who had not been able to stop looking. She said, Kofi. He said, yes. She said, what has always been true? Say it clearly. He was still for a moment. He said, I have loved you since we were children on that street. I loved you when you were with Emeka, and I said nothing because I had nothing to offer you then, and I was not going to come to you with nothing. I loved you every day of the 18 months, and I could not do anything about what was happening to you except make sure that when you came out there was ground to stand on. And I love you now. He said it the way he said all true things, without performance, with the specific, direct quality of someone who has held something for a very long time and has finally put it down where it can be seen. He said, that is what has always been true. She looked at him. She said, I need time. He said, I know. She said, not because I do not. She stopped. She said, because we grew up as neighbors, and in some part of me you are still the boy 3 houses down, and I need to find the way from that person to this one. The person sitting across from me in this office who has been loving me from a distance for I do not know how long. He said, 22 years. She said, 22 years. He said, yes. She said, that is a long time to hold something. He said, yes, it is. She said, give me time. He said, Ada, I have waited 22 years. However much more time you need, I have it. She stood. She went to the door. She stopped. She said, I am going to tell you something and I need you to simply receive it. He said, yes. She said, I see you. I have always seen you. What I need time for is not the seeing. It is knowing what to do with the seeing now that everything is different from what it was. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, that is enough. That is more than enough. She went home. She walked through the Lagos evening to her car, and she drove to the flat in Lekki, and she sat at the desk by the window, and she thought about 22 years and what it costs a person to hold something for that long without asking anything in return. She thought, he deserves someone who chooses him. She thought, the question is not whether I see him. The question is whether I am ready to choose. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately, but when she slept well. Victor called on a Friday morning 3 weeks later. He said, Ada, the investigation is ready. She said, all of it? He said, everything. The original evidence from the trial. The medical report that does not match the surveillance timeline. The communications between Emeka and Linda in the 3 weeks before the listing night. I have a source who kept records. The statement from the former member of Linda's household staff who witnessed the preparation of the staged fall. All of it. I have been building this for 2 years. She was quiet. He said, Ada, this is enough to reopen the case. This is enough to correct the record. She thought about the facility. She thought about the Tuesday morning. She thought about the bag with the same clothes inside it. She said, not yet. Victor said, what are you waiting for? She said, I want them to have something to lose first. Right now, Emeka has a company that is plateauing but surviving. Linda has her family's money and her position. I want to publish this when the fall will be as long as possible. Victor said, how long? She said, 1 more month. I have something in motion. He said, what? She said, the second collection. It launches in 3 weeks. When it lands, when this division is beyond dispute, when Crestline's fashion arm is the most talked about in the city, then we publish. Then the contrast is complete. Then it is not a grievance. It is a verdict. Victor was quiet for a moment. He said, you have thought about this for a long time. She said, I had 18 months with nothing to do but think. He said, 1 month. She said, 1 month. She put the phone down. She picked up her pencil. She went back to work. The second collection was harder than the first. This is always the case. The first collection carries the energy of return, the specific, compressed force of someone proving something after a long silence. That energy is real and it is powerful and it produces work of a particular quality. The second collection has to be better without the benefit of that energy. It has to be better on its own terms, which means it has to come from a deeper place, not from what she had to prove but from what she actually wanted to say. She spent 6 weeks deciding what she wanted to say. Not sketching, thinking. Walking through the markets on Saturday mornings when the division was quiet, looking at fabric and color and the specific way that Lagos women occupied their clothes versus how they were supposed to occupy them according to the industry. She talked to women, not in a formal research capacity, not with a clipboard, but in the way she had always gathered the information that mattered to her. which was by paying attention to specific individuals in specific moments and asking questions that were actually questions rather than confirmations of things she had already decided. What she found was something she had suspected since the 30 days in the flat. The first collection had spoken to the professional woman at 40. The second collection needed to speak to the woman who had been through something and had come back. Not the triumphant version, not the curated press release version of the woman who overcame. The real version. The woman who carries the evidence of what happened in the specific way she holds her shoulders and the specific choices she makes about what she puts on her body. The woman who is not performing recovery but living it. She knew this woman. She was this woman. The second collection was called Evidence. Not publicly, Adiz did not believe in explaining the internal logic of a collection to an audience before they experienced it. The name was private for the team for orientation. The pieces were structured around the idea of clothing as testimony, what a garment says about the person wearing it without the person having to speak. Strong construction. Honest materials. Nothing decorative for the sake of decoration. Every detail load-bearing. Tun said, in the middle of a fitting, "This is more personal than the first one." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is that a risk?" She said, "Personal work is always a risk. It is also the only work worth making." He said, "What if people do not connect with it?" She said, "Then we will know that the market is not ready for honesty and we will adjust." But I do not believe that. I believe people are almost always ready for honesty. They are just not often given it. The second collection launched 8 months after the first. By this point, the division had 3 retail partnerships, 2 international inquiries, and the specific quality of momentum that is different from initial attention. It is slower and heavier and more durable. Initial attention is about novelty. Momentum is about confirmation. People had come to the first collection to see if the return was real. They came to the second collection because the first had told them it was. The room at the second launch was larger and quieter, and the quality of attention was different. These were not people coming to assess. They were people coming to receive. Evidence walked. Adiz stood at the side again. This time she did not think about Emika's company. She did not think about the rooms she had stood in before without her name on anything. She thought about the women she had talked to on Saturday mornings. She thought about the specific woman at the fabric market who had shown her a dress she had made herself because she could not find anything in the shops that fit the way she needed it to fit. Not the size, the feeling. The feeling of a garment that knew what it was for. That woman was in this collection. Every woman she had talked to was in this collection. The room did not erupt. It settled, the specific, deep settling of people receiving something that is accurate. There was a silence at the end of the final look that lasted perhaps 8 seconds, and in those 8 seconds Adiz understood that the second collection had done what she needed it to do. Then the room began. Mrs. Afolabi crossed to her again. She said, "I want exclusivity on 3 pieces. Name your price." Adiz named it. Mrs. Afolabi said, "Done." Kofi was at the back again. She found his eyes across the room. He nodded once, the specific single nod of a man who had known what she was capable of and was watching the knowledge confirmed. She looked away. She went back to the work of the room, the buyers, the editors, the specific social labor of an event that is also a business occasion. Later she found Grace at the edge of the room. Grace said, "The chairman would like to speak with you when you have a moment." Adiz said, "Tell him I will come to the office tomorrow morning." Grace said, "I think he would like to speak with you tonight." Adiz looked at her. Grace said quietly, "Miss Cole, there is something he needs to tell you himself, and he has been waiting for the right moment, and I think he has decided that tonight is the right moment." Adiz said, "Grace." Grace said, "Yes?" Adiz said, "Is there anything you have not told me? From before? Anything I do not know?" Grace considered this for a moment with the specific honesty of someone who respects the question too much to answer it carelessly. She said, "There is one thing." "Yes." Adiz said, "Tell me now or tell me never." Grace said, "He turned down a partnership with the Ose label 8 months ago. Before your first collection. They approached Crestline with a significant offer. A co-branding arrangement that would have been worth considerably more than the fashion division's current revenue. He turned it down. He did not tell you because he did not want you to feel that your position here was contingent on his decisions about Emeka. He wanted the division to be yours regardless of what he chose about Emeka. Adiz was very still. She said, "How significant was the offer?" Grace said, "Very." Adiz said, "And he turned it down." Grace said, "The same week you submitted your proposal for the head of fashion position." Adiz stood in the emptying room with this information. She said, "All right, I will come to the office tonight." He was at the window when she came in. He always seemed to be at the window. She was beginning to understand this was not habit but choice, the specific positioning of a man who thinks better when he can see a large amount of space. She said, "Grace told me about the Osei partnership." He turned. She said, "Why did you not tell me?" He said, "Because I did not want you to feel that your place here was a transaction. That I had refused their money in exchange for." He paused. He said, "I did not want there to be any connection in your mind between what I chose about Emeka and what I offered you. The two things needed to be separate." She said, "They are not separate." He said, "I know that. But I needed you to be able to receive the position on its own terms before you knew the full picture." She stood in the middle of the room. She said, "Kofi, I need you to understand something." He said, "Tell me." She said, "Every time you arrange something for me without telling me, even when the arrangement is generous and correct and made from the right place, it costs me something. Not gratitude. Something in the specific region of my ability to trust my own understanding of my situation." She paused. "I have spent a very long time not being told the truth about what was happening around me. The 18 months inside came from a version of that. Someone arranging the story around me without my knowledge." She said, "I know you are not Emeka. I know the quality of the intention is entirely different. But the pattern of things being arranged without my knowledge, that pattern I cannot afford." He received this. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "You are right." He said, "I have been making decisions on your behalf that I should have made with you, even when they were the right decisions. The manner of them was wrong." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry, not for what I decided, but for how." She said, "I know." She sat down. She said, "The Osei partnership. If they come back after what is coming, I need to know about it." He said, "What is coming?" She said, "Victor's investigation is ready. It has been ready for 2 months. I have been waiting for the second collection to land before I gave him the word." She looked at Kofi. She said, "The conviction review. The evidence. Emeka and Linda. It is all there." He was very still. He said, "You have been carrying this the whole time." She said, "Yes." He said, "Since the 6th month inside." She said, "Yes." He said, "Ada." She said, "I needed to do it myself. I needed the story to be mine, the rebuilding, the collections, the proof of what I am before the accounting. Otherwise it looks like grievance, like a woman who could not let go." She paused. "This way it looks like what it is. The truth arriving at the correct time." He said, "What do you need from me?" She said, "Nothing. Victor handles the publication side. The legal review will happen regardless of what I do. The evidence is strong enough to initiate it without me lobbying." She said, "I just needed you to know, before it happens, because you deserve to know." He looked at her. He said, "When?" She said, "Victor publishes Friday." Victor published on Friday. The investigation ran to 4,000 words and was accompanied by documents. The specific, irreplaceable weight of documented evidence in a story that has previously been one person's word against another's. The communications between Emeka and Linda in the weeks before the listing night. A statement from a former member of Linda's household staff who had been present when the fall was rehearsed. The specific, unglamorous word, rehearsed, which was the most damning word in the piece. Medical records that contradicted the injury timeline. Surveillance footage analysis that had never been presented in the original trial because the defense at the time had not had the resources to commission it. The conviction review was filed the same day. Lagos read the piece the way Lagos reads things that are genuinely significant. Fast, completely, and with the specific quality of a city that has been waiting for a particular story to be told and is now receiving it. The industry read it faster. By Saturday morning, every contact in Adi's phone had messaged or called. She did not respond to most of them. She responded to 3: Victor, Grace, and Kofi. Emeka's response came through his lawyers by Saturday afternoon. They called it fabricated. They called it a targeted campaign by a disgruntled former employee. They used the word malicious 4 times in a single statement, which was the specific, revealing excess of people who have something to defend and have overcompensated in the defending. The review board did not care about the lawyer's statement. The review board cared about the documents. By the following Thursday, Adiz received formal notification that the conviction review had been accepted and that her case would be heard within 60 days. She sat at her desk when the notification arrived. She sat for a long time. She was not crying. She was the specific, complete stillness of a person who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just been told that the carrying is almost over. Not over, almost over. The carrying had produced something. She would not have built the collections without the carrying. She would not be sitting in this office, in this city, in this version of her life without the carrying. That was the specific, terrible arithmetic of it. The thing that had been done to her had also, in a way she would never have chosen, produced the person she had become. She did not forgive Emeka for this. She simply acknowledged it the way she acknowledged all true things, plainly without performance as information. She went back to work. Emeka was arrested 6 weeks after the review hearing. Not dramatically, the specific, ordinary quality of an arrest that happens in the morning, at an office with 2 officers and a document, and the complete absence of the theatrical elements that arrests have in stories. Linda was charged as an accessory 2 days later. The charges were serious. The specific legal language of what had been done translated into the formal terminology of the justice system, which was less vivid than the reality but more durable. Adiz was not at the courthouse. She was in the design floor of Crestline Holdings, in a fitting for the 3rd collection, when Tund came to the door and said, "It happened." She said, "I know. Grace called me 20 minutes ago." He said, "How do you feel?" She looked at the garment on the fitting model. She adjusted the shoulder seam, the specific, small correction that takes a piece from almost right to exactly right. She said, "Like this piece is finally correct." He looked at her. She said, "It is what it is, Tund. It happened. The record is being corrected. That is what I wanted. Not a feeling. The correction." He said, "And the feeling?" She said, "The feeling is," she paused. She said, "Relief is not the right word. Something more like accuracy. Like the story now matches what actually happened." She said, "That is enough." He nodded. He went back to his station. She went back to the fitting. What happened between Adiz and Kofi in the weeks that followed was not a sudden thing. It was the continuation of something that had been happening since the beginning, since the corridor on her first day and the shoulder proportion conversation, since the food place and the 10 years he told her about, since the night after the 2nd collection when she had sat in his office and said, "Every time you arrange something without telling me, it costs me something." It had been happening that whole time in the specific, accumulative way that things happen between people who have known each other too long to begin simply and who must therefore begin carefully. He did not arrange anything without telling her. This was the change. Small and real. He brought her information about the partnership inquiry from a European house that came in after the 2nd collection's international coverage, about a supplier issue that could affect the 3rd collection's timeline, about the specific question of whether the division should expand its team. He brought her these things and he asked her input before he decided anything. It was the specific quality of a man who has understood something and has adjusted his behavior in response to understanding it without requiring acknowledgement for the adjustment. She acknowledged it anyway. She said one morning, in passing, in the corridor outside her office, "You have been different." He said, "You told me to be." She said, "I know. I am noting that you were." He said nothing. He went back to his office. She went back to hers. But something in the quality of the day was different after that exchange. Lighter, in the specific way that things become lighter when an unspoken thing has been half-spoken. She went to his office that evening. She stood in the doorway. She said, "I have been thinking about what I said to you the night of the 2nd collection. About trust and pattern." He said, "Yes." She said, "I have also been thinking about Sewell Street." He waited. She said, "I remember when your mother was ill. The year I was 16. She was ill for 3 months and nobody in your house was eating properly because all the money was going to the hospital and you never told anyone because you were 17 and you did not know how to ask for help. She said, I found out from your sister. I used to leave food outside your gate 3 times a week and pretend I did not know why it was disappearing. He was very still. She said, I never told you it was me. He said, I knew. She said, you knew. He said, I always knew. She said, and you never said anything. He said, you never said anything. They looked at each other. She said, we have been doing this for a very long time. The leaving things without saying and the knowing without acknowledging. He said, yes. She said, I am tired of it. He said, so am I. She said, Kofi. He said, yes. She said, I cannot promise you a simple version of this. I am not simple. What was done to me is not simple. What I have built from it is not simple. If you want me, you have to want the full shape of it, the work and the precision and the specific difficulty of someone who needs to know what is happening around her at all times. He said, Ada. She said, yes. He said, I grew up 3 houses from you on a street that had nothing on it worth keeping except you. I have been building in the direction of you for 20 years without knowing if you would ever be available to be reached. He said, I do not want a simple version. I want the actual version, the full shape. She said, then you have it. She crossed the room. She sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair she had sat in on her first day, when she had said I need 6 months and full creative authority, and she looked at him across the desk and she said, I am not going to be easy. He said, I know. She said, and you are going to have to keep being different, the way you have been this month. He said, I know. She said, then yes. He said, yes what? She said, yes to whatever this is. Yes to starting from here. Yes to finding out what it looks like when 2 people who grew up on the same street finally stop pretending they do not see each other. He said nothing. He stood up. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her. He said, Ada, I have been wanting to say something to you for 20 years and I have been finding reasons not to say it and I am done finding reasons. She said, say it. He said, I love you. I have loved you since we were children on that street and I have loved you through every version of both of us and I will love you in whatever version comes next. He said, that is the thing I have been not saying. That is the full shape of it. She looked at him. She said, I know. He said, you know. She said, Kofi. I have known since I was 19. I just did not know what to do with knowing. He said, and now? She said, now I know what to do with it. There is something this story wants to say before it closes. It is not about a woman who was betrayed, though she was betrayed, completely, by someone who had looked her in the face every day for 3 years and had been planning the exit the whole time. The betrayal was real. The cost of it was real. But this story is about what Adiz Cole built after the betrayal. The 30 days in the flat. The morning discipline. The 4 months of the first collection. The 6 weeks of Saturday market walks that produced the second collection. The plan that had been waiting in her since the 6th month inside. The cold, patient, accurate plan of a woman who understood that the ending she needed required her to be something first. She was always going to be that something. The facility did not produce it. It revealed it. The pressure and the difficulty and the 18 months of reduced circumstances revealed what had always been there. The specific, tempered quality of a person who cannot be diminished by what is done to them because what they are is not located in the circumstances available to them. It is located in them. This story is also about Kofi, who left Soul Street at 18 with nothing and built something in the dark while she was building something in the light, who stood behind her at exactly the distance that let her believe she was standing alone, and who was wrong to do this, and who corrected it when she told him, which is the specific quality of a person worth keeping. And it is about the thing they both did for 20 years, the leaving of things without saying and the knowing without acknowledging. 2 people who could see each other completely and kept finding reasons why the seeing was not yet enough. Fear dressed as consideration. Love dressed as friendship. The specific, expensive habit of people who care about each other so much they spend years not saying so. The cost of that habit was paid by both of them. In years. In distance. In a version of the story that did not have to be as long as it was. But here is what this story also knows. The years produced the collections. The collections produced the division. The division produced the story. And the story is the one that needed to be told. Not a shorter, easier version of it, but this version, with its full weight and its full length and its full accuracy. Adise Cole did not get justice because she was lucky. She got justice because she was patient and precise, and she understood that the ending she wanted required her to build the story that made it undeniable. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. There is a question this story leaves you with. Think about the thing that was done to you. The specific, real thing, not the general difficulty of being alive, but the thing that a particular person did that cost you something you had built or something you had earned or something you had every right to keep. And ask yourself honestly, what did you do with the cost? Did you spend it on anger? On the recursive, exhausting work of returning to the question of how you did not see it coming? Or did you, eventually, after the anger burned through, convert it into something? Because Adise Cole spent 6 months on the anger. And then she made a plan. And the plan became the collections. And the collections became the proof. And the proof became the justice. The question is not whether you can survive what was done to you. You already have. The question is what you are going to make from the surviving. Because the most powerful thing you can do to someone who tried to reduce you is to become, in full public view, exactly and completely and undeniably what they tried to prevent you from being. Adise Cole came back as his boss. But the real ending is not that she was his boss. The real ending is that she came back as herself. Entirely. Loudly. On her own terms. And nobody, not Emeka Osei, not Linda Adetutu, not 18 months inside a facility, not 20 years of a love that took too long to say, nobody could take that from her. Because it was always hers.